The United States has one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Aircraft carriers, advanced fighter jets, global reach. Iran, on the other hand, has been under heavy sanctions for years. Its economy is under serious pressure. So most people think the outcome is obvious. If a war breaks out between the US and Iran, isn't the result already clear? But it's not that simple. Because in some wars, the goal is not to completely defeat your enemy. So what exactly is Iran's strategy? Why can't the US defeat Iran? And why did Trump decide to start this war? That's exactly what we're going to break down in this video. With the launch of the Epic Fury operation, the US carried out large-scale strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile infrastructure, and naval forces. The goal was clear: to weaken Iran's military capabilities quickly and gain the upper hand early in the war. In the first days, the US dominated both the air and the sea. Several Iranian military sites were heavily damaged, and key figures in the command structure were eliminated. But Iran did not back down. Iran is not trying to defeat the US in a direct military confrontation. Instead, it is turning this into a long war of attrition, pushing the conflict to a point where it becomes too costly to sustain. This is where Iran's long-prepared strategies come into play, namely the Mosaic Defense model and the broader axis of resistance network. Instead of large-scale battles, the nature of the war began to change. Smaller attacks, but happening across multiple fronts. So what is Iran's Mosaic Defense strategy? The idea behind it is actually quite simple. Military power is not concentrated in a single center. Instead, the country is divided into multiple smaller defense zones. This means that even if communication with Central Command is cut off, local units can continue fighting on their own. Under this system, Iran is divided into 31 separate military command regions. Each region has its own intelligence, weapons, and command structure. In other words, each region can operate independently, almost like a small army. Even if top leaders are eliminated, the system keeps running. Iran's military structure does not collapse, and operations continue. Mosaic Defense is also built for a long war of attrition. The goal is not a quick victory, but to prolong the war and continuously increase the cost for the enemy. But Iran's strategy does not stop at its borders. Over time, Tehran has expanded this system into a broader regional network. This network is known as the Axis of Resistance. So, what is the Axis of Resistance? The Axis of Resistance is a network of Iran's regional allies and proxy groups. This includes groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and organizations like Hamas. Because of this network, a war against Iran does not stay limited to Iran itself. Instead, the conflict spreads across multiple parts of the region. The main role of this network is to turn the war into a multi-front conflict. For example, if Hezbollah opens a second front against Israel from Lebanon, it becomes much harder for Israel to focus all its military power on Iran. As a result, both the US and Israel are forced to spread their military resources across different regions. These groups often rely on cheap drones and short-range missiles. But to stop these attacks, the US and Israel have to use expensive air defense systems like Patriot or THAAD. So while Iran attacks with low-cost systems, its opponents are forced to defend with much more expensive ones. So what is Iran really trying to achieve? Is it trying to defeat the US in a direct military confrontation? Iran is not aiming for a quick victory in this war. Instead, it is applying a strategy of attrition, aiming to prolong the conflict as much as possible and drain its opponent's military and economic resources. The logic behind this strategy is quite simple. Instead of defeating the enemy directly, the goal is to make the war so expensive and complex that the other side can no longer sustain it. One of the clearest examples of this is the cost of weapons. A Shahed-type kamikaze drone used by Iran costs around $20,000 to $50,000 to produce. In contrast, intercepting these drones with systems like Patriot can cost up to $3 to $4 million. So while Iran attacks with much cheaper systems, the US and its allies are forced to respond with far more expensive defense systems. In a prolonged war, this creates a serious cost imbalance and leads to the rapid depletion of military stockpiles. At the same time, Iran is targeting US military bases in the region. The goal is not only to apply military pressure, but also to destroy expensive radar systems and infrastructure, increase overall costs, and inflict casualties on US forces. In this way, Iran aims to create significant political pressure within the United States. Iran is also using the Strait of Hormuz as an effective strategic tool. Around 20% of global oil trade passes through this strait. By blocking the Strait of Hormuz, Iran prevents oil tankers from passing through. When tanker traffic is disrupted, energy markets react immediately, and oil prices rise above $100. This leads to a global economic crisis. At the same time, Iran is trying to bring China into the conflict. China is the buyer of approximately 91% of Iran's oil. Through this, Iran aims to deepen the political tensions between the United States and China. When all these factors come together, it becomes clear why a war against Iran is so complex and costly. And this raises a critical question. Why can't the United States defeat Iran? The primary objective of the United States and Iran is to overthrow the regime. Donald Trump stated that if an operation was not carried out against Iran, the country could eventually acquire nuclear weapons which would pose a major threat to the world. For this reason, Trump argued that the regime in Iran should be removed. However, overthrowing a regime in Iran is not as easy as it seems. The airstrikes planned by Trump and Israel are not enough to bring down the Iranian regime. Despite airstrikes and the elimination of a significant portion of its command structure, the Iranian government still remains in power. Thanks to the Mosaic Defense model, the state structure continues to function, and the country is able to keep fighting. There are two main possibilities for the regime to collapse in Iran. Either a large-scale uprising by the population, or a full-scale ground invasion from the outside. So far, however, no such popular uprising has taken place. Although there is significant opposition within the country, there is no social movement capable of overthrowing the regime in a short time. For this reason, the only remaining military option for the United States appears to be a ground operation. However, when it comes to Iran, a ground invasion is extremely difficult. Iran covers an area of approximately 1.6 million square kilometers, which is about 4 times larger than Iraq. Moreover, much of the country is mountainous. This terrain turns Iran into a natural fortress. In such geography, a ground army would be forced into narrow passages and would face serious logistical challenges. On the other hand, Iran's strategy of attrition is increasing the cost of the war every day. Continuous missile and drone attacks force the United States to use its defense systems intensively. This makes the economic and military burden of the war increasingly heavier. As a result, the Trump administration is facing growing pressure, both domestically and internationally. As the war drags on, this pressure continues to increase, and the likelihood of the operation ending without achieving its objectives becomes stronger. So despite all these risks, why did Trump choose to launch this operation? This is actually a topic for another video, but I'll briefly touch on it. According to the Trump administration, the operation had 2 main military objectives: to stop Iran's nuclear program and to weaken its military power in the region. But the plan didn't stop there. Trump was also aiming for a political outcome. Influenced by earlier protests in Iran, he expected the government to weaken and believed the Iranian people might rise up against the regime. Trump's ambition for power was also a factor behind this decision. Known for statements about entering oil-rich Venezuela, bringing Greenland under U.S. control and claiming the Panama Canal should belong to the United States, he also wanted to gain control over the Strait of Hormuz, which China is heavily dependent on for energy. As a result, this ambition dragged the United States into a very difficult Iran quagmire. So what do you think? How will this war end? Will the United States really be able to overthrow the regime in Iran? You can share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see more geopolitical analysis videos like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.